Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Rosenberg, and I'm the founder of Engage with Kids. And I welcome you here to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about how to become a dad through surrogacy in the United States. Engage with Kids has been around for 7 years, but we really focused our first 6.5 years on mostly anecdotally sharing stories of how gay dads created their families and what life is like raising them. But over the last couple of years, especially, we've gotten a lot of requests from people who said, can you actually help us create our families? These stories that you share are great. They inspire us, but we like to know, what are the actual steps we need to take? So we launched last year what we're called the Becoming section of Engage with Kids, in which we actually take you through step by step the process you need to follow to become a dad. And that was a launch. That's when we launched these webinar series as well. So today we're going to talk about what surrogacy is, what surrogacy and in vitro fertilization are, who are the key members of your surrogacy team, and what are their responsibilities, why the U.S. is such a popular destination for people in Australia and New Zealand to pursue surrogacy, and sort of what are the unique legal considerations for your international surrogacy journey. And then we'll end with some Q&A. By the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat options. So before I introduce the panelists, I want to let you know, as a dad who's created his family through a combination of adoption and surrogacy, the secret to success is really to find the right family building partners. And there are two important considerations there. One is experience. We want to make sure that you're working with organizations that have got a long and proven track record, not only of helping people become dads, but more importantly, of helping the LGBT community become parents. And second to that experience is passion. So I told you want an experience of just being able to do their job and experience working within our community, but they also have to be just as passionate as I am for helping gay men become dads. And I tell you, Engage with Kids, we partner with just a few organizations, and each organization that we partner with, and we call them our partners to fatherhood, represent both the combination of experience and passion that I'm referring to. And in today's webinar session, we brought 3 of those organizations and 3 of those individuals to join us. So today we're joined by, I really do refer to these people as the distinguished family building experts because they are. Brett Griffin-Young, International Outreach Associate, Circle Surrogacy and Egg Donation, and Circle. Circle and these other organizations have all been in the game for a very, very long time, well over 25 years. Dr. Guy Ringler is a partner of California Fertility Partners, and Richard Vaughn, Esquire, he's a founder of International Fertility Law Group. And again, as I said, they've all been in this game for a very long time, and I promise you they all are very passionate as well about helping gay, bi, and trans men become dads. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce, welcome Dr. Guy Ringler to talk about the role of the IVF clinic.
Thank you, Brian. I'm very happy to be here today to talk with all of you. I'm a partner with California Fertility Partners, where I've been practicing for the last 30 years, and I've been helping gay men to make babies and build families for nearly 25 years. And I have to tell you, it's as exciting and fulfilling today as it was 25 years ago. It's so remarkable to be able to apply everything that we know in reproductive medicine to help gay men have babies through egg donation and surrogacy. Our IVF program is responsible for helping to create some of the world's first IVF babies. So from the beginning, we've seen patients from around the world who have sought us out for our expertise in IVF and for fertility treatments that aren't available where they live. And in most places of the world, surrogacy is not legal, it's not possible. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you through the process of what we do on the medical side to make this possible, to make it real, to allow you to have children. So let's go on to the next slide, which shows the 5 steps. I presented at many resource fairs around the world on how to have babies through surrogacy, and everyone tends to get a little overwhelmed. So I've broken it down into these five easy steps that provide an outline of the process. So let's start with number one, Sema Analysis. Most of the time when I talk to guys, they've never had their sperm count checked. And it's really the first thing you should do to make sure you have adequate sperm of sufficient quality. And if there's any problem with the sperm, there's things that we can do to help make it better. One of my roles in this process is try to optimize each variable in the process to help give you the best possible outcome. You can have a semen analysis done locally, and I'll review it with you and go over any vitamins, antioxidants that you might benefit from if we need to improve it in any way. Now, pre-pandemic, most intended parents would fly to Los Angeles, freeze their sperm, and we would use that frozen sperm in the IVF treatment process. Due to all the travel restrictions, we have collaborating clinics around the world that are helping us to freeze sperm locally, so you may not need to travel to Los Angeles to provide your semen sample. In most cases, we'll use frozen sperm. The only guys I want fresh sperm on are men with extremely low sperm numbers, and that's maybe 5% of the population. But for most men, we'll use frozen sperm in the IVF treatment cycle. When we freeze your sperm, we'll do all the required infectious disease screening, and we'll do genetic carrier screening. In this process, you want to know if you have any mutations for recessive genetic diseases, and you'll want to know those results before you make a final selection of your egg donor, because this gives you an opportunity to minimize the risk of recessive genetic diseases in your children. Step number two, which I think is one of the most important parts of the process, is selection of your egg donor. So we are the IVF clinic, and I work with outside egg donor agencies, surrogacy agencies. I work with many different egg donor agencies because I really want my patients to have a wide selection of candidates to select from. The way egg donation works in the United States is we have well-established agencies that will show you a list of candidates. You'll see photographs, personal history, family history. So you get a good idea of who this individual is. You have the option of meeting the donor in many cases, or remaining anonymous, or sometimes my patients do something in between where they have a Zoom call but don't reveal their contact information. This is an important decision because the egg donor is providing half of the genetics of your children. And her egg quality will have a large impact on the overall success rates. So you want to select your egg donor wisely, and I always help my patients to select a donor. Once you identify the individual, she completes her medical screening. So she will have genetic carrier screening to see if she has any mutations for genetic disease. If you know you have a mutation for a disease such as cystic fibrosis, for example, you cannot select a donor who shares that mutation. So genetic carrier screening is important before your final selection. She will have testing that will predict how many eggs she will make in a treatment cycle. What we do in a treatment cycle is we're stimulating her ovaries to develop all the eggs that she's recruited for that month. And my goal is always to retrieve somewhere between 20 and 30 eggs. Sounds like a lot of eggs, perhaps, but 20 to 30 eggs will end up giving us, in the end, somewhere between 4 and 8 genetically normal embryos in the treatment process. So I always want to make sure we're generating enough embryos to give you multiple attempts at a pregnancy. Hopefully you only need one attempt. In that case, you'll have leftover embryos, but we want to make sure you have enough, a sufficient number. If we have 2 sperm providers, that egg number will divide it into 2 groups. So it will be cut in half, which means we need even more eggs in the treatment process. So you've selected your egg donor, she's completed all of her screening. Now we go on to step number 3, is to create embryos for freezing. And 5 to 10 years ago, we would never create embryos until we had our surrogate ready to allow for a fresh embryo transfer into the surrogate. But today, in high-quality IVF labs, pregnancy rates with thawed frozen embryos are the same as fresh, and that's what we've found. So today, the standard of care has become to create embryos, freeze them before being matched with a surrogate and planning the embryo transfer. So in the treatment process, the egg donor takes daily injections of hormones to stimulate the development of all the eggs that she's recruited from that month. The eggs are retrieved, inseminated with your sperm, usually from our thawed frozen sperm that has been sent by courier from Australia or New Zealand or wherever you are living. The fertilization rate we expect is approximately 75%. So the day after egg retrieval or day one of culture, it's a fertilized egg or one cell embryo. The next phase in IVF in our lab is we keep them undisturbed until day 5. And between day 1 and day 5 to day 6 of culture, we expect a little more than half, or about 60% of those one cell embryos to grow into a sphere of over 100 cells called a blastocyst. And this is the developmental stage an embryo must reach if it's going to have an attempt at starting a pregnancy. Some embryos are so abnormal they never reach that stage. Once it becomes a blastocyst, there's several options. We can freeze it directly, or more often today, we will biopsy it for genetic testing. In the biopsy procedure, our embryologists will remove 3 to 5 cells from the outer layer of the embryo, freeze the embryo, and the cells go to the genetics lab. And they're going to tell us whether or not those embryos contain the correct number of chromosomes. Even in a healthy young egg donor, and most of the egg donors are in their 20s, we can expect about 30 to 40% of those biopsied blastocysts will be chromosomally abnormal. So it's important, useful information for us in selection of the best embryo for transfer. And that genetic information will include whether it's a male or female embryo. And many of my patients find this helpful in their family building. So a week after the biopsy, we have all our results back. We'll know how many normal male embryos, how many normal female embryos, and we'll use that information for selection of the embryo for transfer. Step number 4 is selection of your surrogate mother. And we work with multiple different surrogacy agencies, and I usually recommend my patients talk to a couple. And once you decide which surrogacy agency you're going to work with, and they will present you matches for surrogate mothers. And so you're going to select the individual whose profile you like, who you feel comfortable with, someone that you can trust to carry your child for the next year. And these are amazing women that come from across the United States, and they dedicate a year of their lives to help you become a parent like they are. They undergo extensive screening, psychological screening, medical screening, infectious disease screening before they're approved for the process. After I give medical clearance, the lawyers complete the contracts, and we go on to step 5, which is planning the embryo transfer. One of the big decisions for the embryo transfer is whose embryos to transfer. If we have a gay couple, we're going to transfer one from each or just one, and who's going to be the first biological dad. And I have to say, over the last 10 years, we've made a dramatic transition from transferring multiple embryos to most of the cases today, we'll do a single embryo transfer. 10 years ago, prior to genetic testing, we didn't know if they were genetically normal. So we would transfer 2 or 3 embryos to try to maximize the chance of a pregnancy. But then we learned some of the risks, of multiple gestations, multiple births, and a twin pregnancy is a high-risk pregnancy. It's always safest for babies to be born one at a time. So 90% of transfers today, we will do a single embryo transfer and still obtain a very high pregnancy rate. So we'll decide which embryo we have to transfer. The surrogate's uterus is hormonally prepared to be optimally receptive for the embryo transfer. And on the specific day in her planned treatment cycle, we will thaw our 1 or 2 embryos. The embryo transfer, rather simple yet high-tech procedure done under ultrasound guidance, and I'll place this tiny little catheter through her cervix into the uterus and release the embryo in a drop of fluid. And pre-pandemic, intended parents could be in the room. Today, we have intended parents on FaceTime. So it's like you're right there with your surrogate at the day of conception, essentially. So it's a very emotional day for everyone, and it's a very fun day. 10 days later, we have a positive pregnancy test. My nurses jump up and down. I jump up and down. It's another fun day. So that's sort of an overview of what we do on the medical side to make this happen. But it takes a team of professionals. I have an amazing staff of nurses, embryologists that help me on the medical side. I work with outstanding surrogacy agencies such as Circle Surrogacy that Brett's representing today, and we can't do it without our legal team, Rich Vaughn and his associates, to help bring this all together. And one last point is the egg donor, the surrogates really can come from any state in the United States. All the important procedures are done here in my clinic because I need to control the important parts of the process. But it really takes a team of professionals, and the individuals can come from around the US to help treat our patients from around the world. So if you have any questions, I'm always available by email, or we can set up a call. And I'll turn it back to Brian so we can hear from one of our other panelists.
Thank you so much, Guy. If you have any questions, by the way, today, please feel free to use either the Q&A or the chat and let us know. Next, we're going to go over to Brett Griffin-Young of Circle Surrogacy. And Brett, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about the role of a surrogacy agency?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, my name is Brett Griffin-Young. Like yourself, Brian, I'm a dad through surrogacy and adoption. I've done 2 rounds of surrogacy, 1 round of adoption in the middle. Wow. And I have represented Circle Surrogacy internationally now for coming up on 11 years. So I have a tremendous amount of experience in both surrogacy and adoption, having lived and breathed it myself as well. And I, as a gay man, when my husband and I started this process all those years ago, you know, my son is 11 now. We started back in 2008, and surrogacy for international was in its infancy at that point, and not many people were doing it. So actually, when we spoke to Circle and we said, could we talk to another couple, a gay couple perhaps who's done this, there was a sort of a, well, not really, because there's nobody willing to talk at this point. So when we went through the process, I found it so incredibly empowering. And you used that word earlier, passionate. I became so passionate about what we'd done, what we'd achieved, that I stopped working in my job, and I became this huge advocate for surrogacy. And here I am 11 years later representing Circle. The role of the surrogacy agency is really, really important. You have got some big decisions to make, and it's a big expense to make as well. And that's why you have to make the right choice. And Dr. Ringler is absolutely right. You should speak to several agencies. And I do the same thing with IVF clinics. It's, you know, speak to a couple of clinics, see what you think. Do you have a good relationship with the doctor? Do you feel comfortable and confident in them? Do you feel comfortable and confident in your agency, and so on? It's really important that you feel this way. So the surrogacy agency is really going to guide the intended parents through the whole process. You will, from the initial consultation that you start with till the day you take your baby home, as it says here, but in reality, it's beyond that, because oftentimes when you return to your country of origin, there is still some work that needs to be done. You may need to apply for local passports, things like that, and that's where your agency and your lawyers will come in helpful in providing the information that you need. So although it says when you come home, it's actually it's beyond as well. The first thing really is matching with that screened surrogate. So when you're presented with a surrogate at Circle, she has been fully screened. She's gone through about 4 months worth of screening protocols, where we are looking for her motivation for being a surrogate, her financial situation. There's all these minimum criteria that she has to meet. Her health, her fertility history, all of that comes into play. And I could spend 10, 15 minutes alone just talking about the screening of the surrogates. It really is a very thorough process. The matching of those surrogates then. A lot of people don't take into account when it comes to choosing a surrogate for you, and the agency's looking at surrogates for you and making that match. Don't take into account the personality type or her social ethical view on things, and what your social ethical view on things are, to make sure that it's not just a good legal match, it's not just a good match from a health perspective or anything like that. Actually, you have a lot in common with this person before you even start, because we want to avoid those contentious areas in a journey. For example, there is something wrong, you decide not to do the pre-genetic screening that Dr. Ringler spoke about, and you discover there is an issue with the fetus and you wish to terminate their pregnancy. We would want to make sure that we've matched you with a surrogate who would feel the same way that you would want to carry out this process. Same thing with the egg donor process. I mean, Dr. Ringler touched on the egg donors. We work with egg donors as well, and would help you choose that egg donor. There's a lot of thought that goes into your egg donor. I remember choosing my egg donor for my most recent child. It was quite daunting, and even though I'd done this before, it was a real gut wrench at times of like, oh, is this the right decision? Is this the right person? Because she is going to make up 50% of the DNA and personality and person that is my little boy. So you will get a lot of help around the egg donor piece as well. Insurance support. For us as international intended parents, I know that Australia and New Zealand in particular has a wonderful national health service of sorts. We have an incredible national health service that we're very, very proud of here in the UK. Australia has a hybrid sort, but for us, the insurance piece is a bit of a puzzle for international. The American insurance is challenging, shall we say, and you need that support around the insurance as well. We, as an agency, offer legal guidance, and we have the escrow management as well. We started as a law firm, and we have lawyers on staff. So you would get all of that legal guidance directly with Circle. So we're one of the all-inclusive agencies, for want of a better term. We coordinate with the medical providers. So, for example, Dr. Ringler's clinic, we know his medical coordination team. They know us. It's a relatively seamless conversation. And you just tell us which doctor you're working with, and we know who to deal with in those clinics. And then obviously we will help with that whole preparation for birth and travel home. Now, I had a little boy last summer, so I've had one of the pandemic babies. And it was an incredible experience to go through the process of getting into the United States, being there for the birth. I was in the room for the birth, and I got to cut his umbilical cord. I got to hold him first. I went to my hospital room with him myself. All of that was prepared for me by Circle. All of the legal work was done in advance. When I arrived at the hospital, they knew exactly who I was. There was no question of, who are you? Why is this woman you have pregnant? It was all very clear. It was all very open and very honest. And as likewise with the travel home, it wasn't as easy as it should have been. Pre-pandemic, or hopefully in the next year or so, things will become a little simpler. Passport offices were closed, for example, in the US. So we needed a little bit of extra help around getting an emergency passport to get Frederick home and things like that. But even saying that, we came home when he was 3 weeks old. So it took us 3 weeks to sort out a birth certificate and emergency travel documents and so on during a pandemic. You can expect to do that in roughly 2 weeks when there is no global lockdown and closed borders and so on. I'm going to move to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the average surrogacy journey, what the length of time it takes and so on. So as it says here, roughly 18 to 24 months, and that is pretty accurate now. Even with the COVID delays that we've been seeing, we're still completing journeys, or journeys will be completed within the 18 months or so. So first of all, the egg donor. How to find an egg donor? Well, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can speak to your IVF doctor. They may have an egg donor database themselves. We have an egg donor database. There are egg donors online. What you want, though, is that medical support around this. So as Dr. Ringler said, when you identify an egg donor, he will help review her with you. Now, the way that you find your egg donor, if you're working with Circle's egg donor database, it really is a filter process. Once you're registered, you can filter on ethnicity, hair color, eye color, height, weight, education, and a whole raft of different filters that are available to you. So you get that huge tranche of women down to a slightly more manageable number that you'll have a close look at. The egg donors, how are they screened by the agency? Well, there's a screening protocol that goes on. There's minimum age and maximum age guidelines. There is FSH testing done. I mean, I don't want to go into too much of the medical stuff because I shall just embarrass myself in front of the doctor. But the reality is they go through a raft of tests to make sure that they are fertile. And we do that through blood tests and so on, just to make sure that there is a presence there of of eggs. You may have what's known as a proven donor, somebody who's donated already in the past, and that will give you a clear indication of how she responded to the medication and how many eggs you can anticipate and so on. My donor for Frederick was a proven donor, so I had a very clear idea of how many eggs to expect, and then obviously the total number of embryos as a result of that. Dr. Ringler touched on this, the anonymous, the open, or the known donor. Now, I have a mixture in my family. I have a known donor for my oldest son, Sebastian. He knows his donor, he's met her, it's all very open. My daughter was adopted after we had my son. When he was 3 years old, we adopted my daughter, and she was out of the foster system. She was, for want of a better term, she was abandoned at birth. And we have no contact whatsoever with her birth family. So as far as she is concerned, it's almost an anonymous donor situation. We know who they are, but we don't know where they live or anything about them. It was a very, very sad story, which I shan't go into on this call, but the reality is we have no history of her background. So when it came to doing Frederick, we had a lengthy discussion around, should we do another known, full known donor, and how would that affect my daughter? Would she feel like the odd one out? Would she feel that's unfair that both of her brothers have full access to their genetic history and so on? So we opted for that semi-known or open, where you have some information, but it's not a full known donor. I think if we hadn't have adopted my daughter, it probably would have been a completely different conversation. I am a huge fan, a massive advocate of known donation. I just think it's incredibly important and to know where you've come from as a child. But it's entirely up to you, and it's something that we would talk to you at length around what's best for you and what would fit best for you. The optimal characteristics of an egg donor comes down to really, you're looking at somebody who's got a good fertility, someone who's nice and young, and the rest, to be honest, is personal choice for you, because I found this really interesting as a gay man looking at egg donors with my husband. What I thought was attractive in a woman was not what he thought was attractive in a woman, and led to some very interested, heated conversations around donors. But it's personal choice, really. The optimal characteristics: young, healthy, fit, and fertile. As far as the surrogate is concerned, how to find a surrogate? Well, in all honesty, that's something that your agency will do for you. Most reputable agencies will present you with one potential match at a time. It isn't a catalog of uteruses where you go, I want number 3127. It is the right person for you. It's the right person from a legal perspective. It is a right person for you from a location, from a personality type, as I mentioned earlier, from her social ethical view on things. We want to find the right person to work with you. So we help with that. How are they screened by the agency? Well, this is, as I mentioned earlier, a lengthy process. It's a good 4 months or so of screening that goes on. In a consultation with myself, I would go through in great detail exactly what it is. But just to give you an idea, she has to have at least had one biological child of her own, so we know that her reproductive system works. She has to meet a minimum criteria as far as education is concerned, as far as employment or income is concerned. There's a whole list of things. In fact, my first surrogate said on several occasions she almost quit during the process, because every time she thought she had provided enough information, we wanted to know a little bit more about her. It's a very arduous, hard thing for the surrogates to do in many ways, but it's also a way to show that they're in this for the long haul. This is not a fleeting, oh, I'm going to be a surrogate because I was watching Oprah last night and they mentioned surrogacy. This is a commitment from a woman. It's a huge ask of them. How are they matched? I think I've touched on that a little bit. We look at you and your situation, and we look at her and her situation, and we find what we think is a potentially good match. And we have a matching, a matching team, which incorporates social workers and lawyers and so on, to cover all the bases. And they meet on a weekly basis to discuss the intended parents and the surrogates and who would be a good match for who. Again, the ideal characteristics of a surrogate: you're looking for someone who is not too young. Our guidelines, I believe, are sort of 24 years old, 25 years old, up to the age of 39. We would look a little older at 39, but there's not many that would go past that. We're looking for someone who's fit and healthy. Obviously, do not smoke, drink within moderation, and obviously not going to drink during the pregnancy. Clear of drugs, have a good health history, good medical history, I should say, and somebody who is doing this for the right reasons. I think that really does need to be addressed. What is your motivation for doing this? Because if at any point it's for the money, then it's not somebody we want to work with, because this is not about the money. This is about helping somebody create their family. And if they're doing this just for the money, then it's usually because they're in some sort of financial difficulty or want to use that for something other than over and above what they're earning. So the ideal characteristics really are very long-winded and, again, kind of personal to you. And that's something that we would do once you're in the program. We would have those conversations. You should make sure that we're finding the right person that is ideal for you and you are ideal for them.
Great. Thank you, Brett. And now, Rich, if you don't mind taking over.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be joining all of you today. So my name is Richard Vaughn, or Rich Vaughn. I go by both. And I'm the founder of International Fertility Law Group. It is a national law firm. We work all across the United States. And between my experience and the experience of my law partners when I first joined, the firm dates back to 1992. So we've had over 28 years of experience in this field. And we've helped thousands of clients from 93 countries around the world. And I know that this experience is also similar to what Dr. Ringler and Brett and Circle have. We've all worked with thousands of people for many years, and we are truly passionate about that. I couldn't more strongly endorse that notion that experience and passion are really the right combination of what you're looking for in the professionals that have helped you or that are going to be helping you. My husband and I are fathers as well through egg donation and surrogacy. We have twin boys who are 12, and just to relate back to Guy's comment, we did this at a time when we did not do a frozen cycle. So we did a fresh transfer, finding the surrogate and the donor at the exact same time, and getting them on their medications at just about the same time. So a lot more, it felt a lot more random than it is now. It's a lot more controlled, and success rates are higher today. So let's talk about, the case for pursuing surrogacy in the U.S. Just very briefly, I'm not going to get into too much of the law in New Zealand and Australia because I'm not licensed there. I can help you with any state in the U.S., but what I can tell you, having worked with hundreds of clients from both countries over the years, that altruistic surrogacy, non-compensated surrogacy is allowed in Australia and New Zealand, but that's harder to come by. So if you're looking for more options, more choices, and you're looking for a safe, legal, and secure foundation for your surrogacy, then your options really are to go to the U.S. So many people are actually looking to the U.S. There are some other countries where you can go, but not with the same sort of legal foundation and the medical success rates that you have in the U.S. Now, there are many agencies and clinics in the U.S. that have 25 plus years experience in helping LGBT individuals become parents. That's really important because you have the societal exceptions here in the U.S. as well for this. Now, before you start this journey in the U.S., it's important that you do consult with an attorney in your home country. One of the things that we do as lawyers is, our ultimate job is to make sure that you become legal parents. And we want to make sure that we're having our eye on the ball at the end of the game, that what your ultimate goals are to become the legal parents, but also to come back home and have your parental rights recognized at home as well. So it's important to have that consultation with a local home country attorney at the beginning. All right, Brian, next slide. All right, so in the US, there are some legal considerations that you need to keep in mind. In the US, in terms of surrogacy, we have to follow the law of the state where the surrogate gives birth. The laws do vary from state to state. The laws in the US on surrogacy are not federal, they're not national, so it is state by state. And the same would be true of egg donation, although there really are less well-developed laws regarding egg donation. It's basically allowed because it's not prohibited. There are in these various states different approaches to establishing your parental rights, but the ultimate goal generally is to get a court order, excuse me, that declares that the surrogate is not a parent, that you are the parent or parents, and that your names will go on the birth certificate in the way that you need them to be listed. So I've already kind of mentioned this. Okay, and then in terms of the parentage process, when we go to court, that can vary a little bit from state to state. In general, there are two approaches. There's a pre-birth order or a post-birth order. So some states don't allow us into court until after the baby's born. In that case, we go to court shortly after birth and we obtain a post-birth order. Most states, however, are what we call pre-birth states that allow us to go to court during the pregnancy and obtain a pre-birth order. It's important to know, though, that the pre-birth orders, although they're signed by the judge during the pregnancy, they are not effective until the moment of birth. But the nice thing about a pre-birth order is it's done, it's out of the way, there are no questions, everything's automatic right at birth. Now, when the child is born in the US, the child is automatically a US citizen. So the child is not stateless, as you might find in some other countries, Ukraine, for instance. So there's no question about the child's statehood. The child is therefore entitled to a US passport, so the child can travel home. And as I mentioned, the ultimate legal objective in these cases is to make sure that you're the legal parents. Now, there's a process we have to go through to make that happen. And you've heard a little bit about this already from the prior speakers, but I'm going to kind of go through the process for you. So with both your surrogate and your egg donor, you will need to enter into a contract. And the typical process is, as Guy had mentioned, they need to be medically screened and approved first. Once we, as the lawyers, receive the green light on the medical clearance, then we start drafting the contracts. And once we draft the contract, typically we send it to you. You get a chance to go over it. We'll explain all of the details. We don't have time to get into that today, so I'll just kind of gloss over it, but we'll make sure you fully understand the contract. Then when you approve it, we send it to the attorney that's representing your egg donor or your surrogate, depending on which contract we're working on. It is an essential feature of this process that your egg donor and surrogate have their own attorney as well. So they will review the contract with their attorney. Well, we might have some changes to negotiate, but we get those taken care of pretty quickly. And then when the contracts are done and signed, we send a legal clearance back to the doctor. So the doctor knows that the contracts are done. Everyone understands their rights, their risks, their obligations, and that they can proceed forward. And then the doctor can set the medical calendar and establish when the egg donor or surrogate will begin their injectable medications to get ready for the medical procedure. So that's the contract stage. And usually the contracts don't take terribly long, at least with our office. It's about 2 to 3 weeks on average for an egg donor contract and about 3 to 4 weeks for a surrogacy contract. Now, I mentioned that in the process, ultimately our goal is to get a court order. It's probably helpful to know that at least where the donor is concerned, once you've finished the contract, that's all you have to do from the legal end with the donor. With the surrogate, though, there are several steps culminating in the court order process at the end. Now, the pre-birth order that I mentioned earlier, again, it's not effective until birth, but yet this is your baby, this is your pregnancy as well. And it's important to know that the contract doesn't really give you parental rights. It establishes that you are the intended parents. So this surrogacy contract makes it clear that you're the intended parents and that your surrogate will cooperate with you and do and sign whatever you need her to do and sign to protect your parental rights. But we need to do something during the pregnancy to give you at least the equivalent of parental rights as best we can under the law in the US. So what we do is we would have your surrogate actually designate you as guardians of the baby during the pregnancy. This would give you a healthcare power of attorney. This allows you to then make medical decisions or be involved in medical decisions for the baby during the pregnancy, as long as you're not putting the surrogate in harm's way, of course. It also would give you access to speak to the obstetrician and to perhaps view her pregnancy records if you need to see them, and to be present at any of the healthcare visits. You have to keep in mind that the obstetrician's patient is the surrogate, not you. Their second concern, of course, is the baby, but their first concern is the surrogate. And because the surrogate is the patient, the obstetrician cannot share her health information without some form of permission. So this healthcare power of attorney that she's granting to you gives you that permission, so you have direct access to the doctors and the hospital. Now, in the guardianship documentation, it's also important that you establish who you would want as your backup guardian in case, God forbid, something were to happen to you during the pregnancy. If you were to die or become incapacitated and you have a baby on the way, we need to know who's going to take care of that baby if something has happened to you. So it's important for parents starting this process to think about who they want as their backup guardians. Now, there are some state laws in the US that require that you actually have a will in place. And I know some agencies, including Circle, prefer that you have a will in place. Ultimately, the thing that we're concerned about as lawyers is that you have guardians established, but wills are also a good idea. You're starting a family, you should be planning to take care of your family in every single way, including, financially and with your estate. So that's the guardianship phase. Now let me move on to the parental establishment phase. This is a process that we recommend starting at about 14 weeks of pregnancy once you get through that first trimester. The first trimester is when most miscarriages are likely to occur. So once the pregnancy is more stable, then we would start getting ready for this court process by sending questionnaires out to all of the involved parties so we can gather the information that we need to then draft court documents. The good thing about most of these pre-birth order states is that typically all we have to do is submit documents. We typically do not have court hearings. So you don't really typically need to appear in a court hearing, although there are some exceptions to this rule. So there are a few states that still have hearings. But we gather this information, draft the documents, we send them out to everyone via email to print, sign, and return, and then we file the case with the court. Understand, of course, that this case that we're presenting to the court is a fully agreed petition. There's no dispute. We're not telling the judge that we have a problem that needs to be solved. It's a fully agreed situation. Everybody agrees. We even, in most cases, submit a copy of the surrogacy contract to the judge so the judge can see that from the beginning it's been an agreement that the intended parents will become the legal parents. So it's really just a matter for the court to review the paperwork, make sure it's accurate, maybe ask a couple of questions of the attorney, and then sign the court order. We usually see that the court order is signed by about 28 weeks. That's our goal, at least. And when the court order is signed, again, remember, it's not effective until birth, but we still will send a copy of that court order to the hospital. And as Brett had mentioned, it's essential to start communicating with the hospital early so that all of their questions are answered. They have all the documentation they need so that when the birth occurs, everything runs very smoothly at the hospital. At the hospital, there usually is a quick process to start the birth certificate paperwork. They usually have a worksheet or some sort of paperwork to complete for the birth certificate. They typically will attach the court order to that birth certificate worksheet and send it to the local vital records office. And that is a state agency that prepares the birth certificate. Now, birth certificates, without any pressure from lawyers and agencies, would normally take 2 to 3 months. We always help get them expedited so you can have them usually in 2 weeks or less. And then after the birth certificate is prepared, you can then, and you have it in hand, you can then apply for the US passport for the baby and any other travel documents that you might need to get back home. Now, again, I can't emphasize enough, it's important that you have connected with a lawyer in your country so that you know what we need to prepare for at the end. And if you need any additional work with your local lawyer and us, we will collaborate with them so that all things that you need done in the home country are completed as well. So we'll help support that process.
So that's an excellent question. For the surrogate, the basic requirements for surrogate is that she should have had at least one normal pregnancy with delivery at term, ideally not more than 5 deliveries. If she's had a prior high-risk pregnancy, it may disqualify her. High risk would be history of preterm labor with preterm delivery, hypertension in pregnancy, diabetes requiring insulin during her pregnancy, any medical risk factor that would complicate pregnancy or a history of a complicated pregnancy would disqualify her. Sometimes on uterine evaluation, we'll find a uterine factor that would disqualify her, such as a uterine fibroid that's distorting the uterine cavity, or recently I saw a surrogate On her initial screening, we found adhesions inside her uterus, which would lower the success rate. So in the medical screening of the surrogate, before I meet with her in person, I'm going to review all of her prior past medical records, all her prior pregnancy records, to make sure there was nothing in her prior pregnancies that would make her high risk in any way. And of course, she has a careful uterine evaluation to make sure she has a normal uterine environment. For the egg donor, sometimes we'll find egg donors have low ovarian reserve. They'll have a low AMH, which predicts that they're going to make a low number of eggs. That would disqualify her as being an egg donor. An egg donor with abnormal ovaries on ultrasound. Maybe she has a large ovarian cyst that would prevent us from stimulating her. And then it's important that the egg donor has genetic carrier screening. You cannot work with a donor that shares a mutation that you have in your genetic carrier screening. Occasionally on the egg donors, we'll find abnormal karyotypes, which would mean that a percentage of her eggs would be genetically abnormal from the start. So that would disqualify her. We carefully screen both the egg donors and surrogates to make sure they're going to be optimal candidates for egg donation surrogacy, to give you the best chance at a successful pregnancy. Well, I can talk about the medical costs. I mean, we've put together a package pricing so our intended parents can budget for the process. And I think the medical costs between clinics are fairly similar, between $35,000 and $40,000 for the medical treatment of the sperm provider, the egg donor, the surrogate, medication, genetic testing. And this would cover the cost of creating embryos and transfer of an embryo to the surrogate for that treatment cycle.
As far as legal is concerned, you have to consider that you will be paying for the egg donor's attorney, the surrogate's attorney, and of course your own attorney, and for court costs. So on average, you're looking at legal in the ballpark of 15 to 20,000 US. That's a big range, and it just depends a little bit from state to state, what you can expect for court costs and such.
If you're looking at an agency like Circle, you're looking in the region of 150,000, which would include all of your legal costs. Sorry, Richard. All your legal costs, egg donor, everything. The only thing excluded from that is IVF costs. So 150,000 guaranteed baby program, legal IVF costs on top of that.
Yeah. So what we typically would say if we're asked that generic question, and it's a broad range of anywhere from maybe 140, 150 up to 200 US for everything. That's for egg donation and surrogacy, and realizing that there are ranges in what agencies charge, ranges for what clinics charge, ranges for attorneys, ranges for the donor fees, and ranges for the surrogate and her fees and all of her ancillary expenses. So with all of the ranges, that's why it gets to be like
I know.
$50,000 swing.
It's a good question. Everybody asks it, but it's actually quite a big range. And the advice is to speak to different agencies. Obviously, I represent Circle, but there are many other agencies out there. Speak to the agencies, find out what they offer, and take it from there.
Yeah, I agree with Rich. I usually tell my patients somewhere between 160 and 200, and we work hard to keep it. Used to be a little less than 160, but I think that's a pretty realistic range.
It is. It's a very thorough process, which involves you, Dr. Ringler, in particular, in that there's minimum requirements, and then it becomes more and more and more intensive for the surrogates. And thinking back to my very first surrogate, who said, after 4 months, I thought I was going to quit and go, I just can't be bothered anymore because it's just such hard work. It starts with how many children do you have, biological children. They have to have at least one pregnancy of their own that was uneventful. And from there, it goes right down to financial history, reason for being a surrogate, criminal history, medical, et cetera, right down to Dr. Ringler going, I'm going to assess this woman to say yes or no. It's a very thorough, very lengthy process, start to finish. Do you want? I mean, that's a very generic overview, but Dr. Ringler, from a medical perspective, obviously there's a lot you have a look at.
Well, it actually starts with the surrogacy agency, and I think maybe 10% of applicants get through to the, through the surrogacy agency, and then they're matched with the patient.
A little less.
A little less. And then once my patient's matched with a surrogate, I won't see her in person until I personally have reviewed all of her past pregnancy records. Now that may be 10 pages or 400 pages, because we want to make sure there's nothing in a prior pregnancy that would exclude her. So then once she passes that test, she's seen in person for physical exam, uterine evaluation, blood test. And then most of the time they pass that. Occasionally we'll find something like the recent patient with uterine adhesions. But most of the time they get to me, they usually pass unless we find something.
You're pretty strict as well, aren't you?
Well, I got to look out for my patients.
Cool.
I want
that's what I'm saying. That's why I was giving you a
best
little
possible environment for their embryos, right?
Absolutely.
But I have to say, surrogates are these amazing women that come from across the United States who dedicate a year of their lives to help other intended parents become parents like they are. They really do it from the heart. And Brett, I love your stories because it's so true. They're just these really amazing women.
They're goddesses in many ways. They really are.
I want to thank our panelists, each and every one of you. Dr. Guy Ringler, partner of California Fertility Partners, Brett Griffin-Young for Circle Surrogacy, and Rich Vaughn, founder of International Fertility Law Group. Thank you all so much. We're going to send an email follow-up to all of our attendees, and we'll include their links to their organizations and et cetera, alongside this video as it's posted on Engage with Kids. But in the meantime, I want to give each of you an opportunity to sign off officially. Guys, should we start with you?
Thank you, Brian, for inviting me today, and so proud to be here with these great panelists, Rich and Brett. I'm passionate about helping gay men have babies. As a gay man, I'm committed to doing all I can to give you the highest chance of success on the first attempt. And everything that we all do is to help you be successful in building your family. So best of luck to you, and hope you'll come visit us.
Thank you. Brett?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you for having me on this and giving me the opportunity to speak out about being a gay dad again. And I never get bored of doing it 11 years in, and I'm still as enthusiastic as I was on day one. And just to sort of say to Australia and New Zealand, I pre-COVID visited your fair shores twice a year to meet with intended parents, and hopefully I'll be starting that again next year. I've got a lovely selection of gay dads in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Auckland, Christchurch, etc. that I come and visit, and we have get-togethers. And I think one of the lovely thing about surrogacy and being gay dads is that there is a community to it now. And I think Richard probably agree with us that there is a sort of a common bond, for want of a better term. And when I arrive in Australia and we have the get-togethers and I get to see the babies that I helped create in a small way by consulting with you and explaining how the process works, then staying in touch with you as you were pregnant, and then finally coming back and getting to meet the babies, it's just the most rewarding thing in the world. And I love what I do. And just as one final thing I would say is, whoever you decide to work with, please make sure you use me as a point of reference. I mean, as far as agencies and so on are concerned, although I represent Circle, our goal is to help you have a baby. And if Circle's not the right fit for you, that's fine. Talk to me. I'm more than happy to help and support and guide through processes. I do know a lot of different people in this field, and yeah, just utilize me. I just love to do this. So use me.
Thanks, Brett. Rich.
Yeah, I have to echo that as well. I think it's important that you understand that you have a network of people here that would love to connect you with other people. If you need resources, we can give you lots and lots of resources, including talking to other parents. There's lots of gay parents all over the world that we've helped. So if you need to talk to someone that's been through this, there's going to be a plethora of options. So I'm happy to connect you with my former clients as well. I would say that I'm passionate about helping all intended parents, but it's especially meaningful for me as a gay dad to be able to sort of give back to my community, as it were. So it's really, really special to be talking to you today. And if we can help you, if I can help you, please contact us.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us.